Today, I want to talk about something that I've been wondering about for years. What will happen when Jane Poole and Sansa Stark come face to face in Winds of Winter? And I want to state we are talking about book Sansa, who I really like, and who 13-year-old me can really relate to on so many levels. I think the outcome of Jane and Sansa's reacquaintance will be heavily influenced by whether Sansa is still in Littlefinger's thrall. If you have seen my Littlefinger versus Puppetman video, you know I believe Sansa will eventually break away from Littlefinger and have a large part in his destruction. But it won't be the terrible soap opera drama the show gave us. For this video, let's assume that Jon Snow is dead or at Hardhome, so he cannot identify Jane Poole as a fake. I think Jane Poole will be extremely angry at Littlefinger, but I doubt this anger will overflow too strongly towards Sansa. If Sansa chooses to keep the lie going that she is Arya, she may even spot an ally in Jane Poole, as Jane will be extremely grateful to remain Lady Arya and not Jane Poole, the almost whore. Jane was extremely happy to see Theon, so why not Sansa? Both Theon and Sansa did things to hurt Jane, and she seems to understand what it is like to be powerless and have no choice. Jane may be jealous of Sansa, as Sansa had an easier time. She may also resent Sansa's beauty, especially now that Jane has lost the tip of her nose to frostbite. But I think Jane would be able to overlook all her jealousy and anger if Sansa gave truth to the lie that she is Arya. We know Jane is smart enough to heed Theo's warning that Jane is no one, but Arya is a lady with status that people will look after and respect. I think Jane Poole would sell her own soul to remain Arya Stark. So she will probably side with Sansa if Sansa chooses to keep the lie going. Jane may even feel protective of Sansa, as Sansa, even though she has been a pawn on the chessboard for a long time, is yet to see the full horror of war. Sansa is also very sheltered and is yet to have a sexual relationship. Jane may feel protective of the older girl because of the own horrors Jane has endured. As simply one woman to another, she may wish to protect her as a real sister or as an old friend would do. And Sansa may be grateful. This brings me on to my next point. I really feel Littlefinger's feelings towards Sansa are not fatherly. He is grooming her in every sense of the word. Littlefinger already did this to Jane, leaving her in a brothel, and Jane may see this behavior where Sansa is blind to it from inexperience. I have discussed Littlefinger's relationship with Sansa with many close friends who have also read the books. Most people I talk to agree, of course, Littlefinger is using Sansa, but he views her from a fatherly standpoint, whereas I think Littlefinger is a sexual predator who has been grooming Sansa since the first book when he meets her at the Hand's tourney. Littlefinger owns a number of brothels that procure young girls like Jane and Sansa for older men. He obviously condones this behavior, and we can presume that he enjoys all the perks of owning a brothel. Why breed fine horses when you cannot have a fine mount yourself? And Littlefinger considers Sansa Stark, the image of her mother Catelyn Tully, his lost love, the finest mount of all. So why would he waste her on Harry the heir when he could have her for himself? I think these advances will be a great shock for Sansa, who is not expecting them and views Littlefinger as a father. These advances will probably start after Sansa marries Harry the heir, so she will go to her wedding bed a maid. This would destroy any trust Sansa has for Littlefinger, I believe. If my sexual predator theory is not correct, Sansa might grow to distrust Littlefinger because of his murder of Sweet Robin. Or Sansa may realize that Harry the heir is an asshole who Littlefinger has forced her to marry, knowing full well that Harry will mistreat her. These, of course, are educated guesses, but I think a rift between Sansa and Littlefinger is inevitable in Winds of Winter. She cannot stay his loving daughter forever. I think this initial mistrust of Littlefinger will be what brings Sansa and Jane Pole back together. But even without the mistrust of Littlefinger, I think it very likely the girls will bond. Sansa thinks many times how she would like a friend, especially when she was talking to Miranda Royce, who she seems to dislike having to lie to, and the girls have a lot in common. Both are orphans. Both of their fathers died in King's Landing. Both were married against their will, though Tyrion was much better than Ramsay. Both are scared and looking for a male figure to protect them. Both were manipulated and used by Littlefinger. Both are scared of Littlefinger. And never underestimate the bond of shared childhood and friendship. Look at Ned and Robert. Maybe I just want a girl power moment too badly, but I do think something will come of all the links between these two young female characters.
But what do you think?
Today I want to talk about one of my favorite characters. Book Sansa, not one-dimensional show Sansa, who is as bland as boiled carrots. Book readers seem to be very split on Sansa, whereas everybody loves Arya. I think this is because Sansa's plot involves a lot more intrigue and grey situations than her sister. In Arya's plot, everything is black and white, good or bad, whereas Sansa is left floating in a grey wasteland of hard situations where she doesn't always make the best decision, but she is a child. And this video I want to talk about why I think Sansa should be given a break, and why she is going to be a great character and a force for good in the Winds of Winter. The reasons people tend not to like Sansa normally amount to three things: her lying to King Robert about Joffrey and Micah, the telling of Ned's plan to Cersei, and her thoughts about Sweet Robin. But we're going to break everything down here, so keep listening. First, let's remember, Sansa is only 11 when the books begin. I believe people tend to forget this because the show aged up her character. Sansa also came from a large family, having 5 siblings, and neither Ned or Catelyn seemed to have paid much attention to her. She was pretty and well behaved, and that seemed to have been enough for both of them, leaving her in the care of her septa, so they could focus their energy on their more difficult children. Getting Arya to behave and Bran to stop climbing would have been enough for most parents. But Ned also had to train Jon and Robb. Catelyn also seems to have only shown maternal affection for Sansa when she remained quiet and pretty. These characteristics seem to be Sansa's natural disposition, and which have become more dominant through training. Like a child only praised when they get good grades, they become obsessed with schoolwork like Sansa, or rebel like Arya. Though Sansa was relatively distant from both parents, this was not uncommon in aristocratic medieval families. Sansa seems to have had a very happy childhood, though. She would have preferred more singers at Winterfell. She thinks back fondly on snowball fights with Arya and Bran, and when she thinks she will marry Willis Tyrell, she imagines naming her children after her siblings. Her childhood seems to have been very sheltered, and mainly within the walls of Winterfell. She doesn't seem to have gone riding or hunting very much, or even to the winter town. Imagine Sansa as a child who was homeschooled. Sansa also seems very confused by her sense of identity. and you can see this in her choice of worship. She hops back and forth between her mother and father's religion, but she seems to be settling on the old gods. I think this is how she will get out of her marriage to Tyrion, by claiming it was not done in a religion she recognizes, and also it was not consummated. There is also a lot of symbolism at play in George R. R. Martin's books, and Sansa is no exception to this rule. George R. R. Martin loves to play with symbolism, and I believe lemon cakes hold a symbolic clue to Sansa's future. Lemons symbolize optimism, which Sansa has in abundance. They are also a natural cleanser, with the ability to purify, which I believe represents Sansa cleansing herself of the taint of Littlefinger. Cakes have a double meaning, but small individual cakes, such as lemon cakes, mean missing an important task, or missing the point of an action. This is very relatable to Sansa, who early on in our story lies to the king, not realizing her actions will cause Lady's death, and later betrays her father's plans, not understanding the consequence of her actions. Cakes also represent temptation and weakness, which may come into play for Sansa in the Winds of Winter, as we all know she likes the finer things in life. This brings me on to my next point, which I feel most people overlook. All the Stark children are wargs of different degrees of power. Even if Sansa only has weak skin changer powers, if Sansa was already bonded to Lady's death would have been extremely emotional and traumatic for her, as she just started to flex her skin changer powers. Look how Vladimir Sixskin feels after he loses his animals. Sansa must have felt something similar. Watching her father's execution must also have been profoundly emotional for her. It scarred Arya, and Yoren was covering her eyes and she was at a distance, whereas Sansa had no such protection and was standing right next to the executioner's block. People tend to forget Sansa has also witnessed death all around her. Maybe not as close up and personal as Arya, but she has seen it. A lot of death, including her father, her aunt, and Sir Dontos who rescued her, and the Battle of the Blackwater. And unlike Arya, Sansa has been the unprotected object of sexual desire and advances for years. Joffrey having the King's Guard strip her, the Hound waiting in her rooms after the Battle of the Blackwater with malicious intent, Tyrion groping her on her wedding night, and Marillion's advances on the Fingers. These scary situations have affected Sansa's relationship with desire to the point where she has nightmares and can't seem to separate fear from lust. I believe these experiences have affected Sansa to such an extent she will stay glued to Littlefinger, who in her naive mind is the best of a bad bunch, as he has only kissed her once. She doesn't seem to see his more sinister motives. People also tend to dislike Sansa because of her inner monologue about Sweet Robin, but she has been left aged 13 to mother a sickly 8-year-old who is a spoilt brat. He is her cousin, but that doesn't stop the fact he is a very unlikable child. If you have ever been asked to babysit a younger relative as a teenager, I think most people have thought at some point, I hope they calm down and leave me alone, using more colorful language. People also like to bring up that near the end of Game of Thrones, when Sansa is brought before the small council, she forgets to ask about Arya. Even I thought this was a little odd, not to ask about your sister. But when anybody, never mind an 11-year-old girl, is put in an interview situation, it can make you very flustered, and you tend to forget your most important question. And for most people, this situation would be a job interview. But for Sansa, aged 11, it was a matter of life and death, concerning her family. Of course, she forgot to ask her questions. She also feels bad at the end of the chapter for forgetting to ask about Arya. I also think she never asks about Arya again, because she presumes Arya is dead, and doesn't want to deal with that, because she has a lot of other stuff going on at the time. There is also Sansa's marriage to Tyrion, which is upsetting by anybody's standards. But apart from their wedding night, Tyrion was quite kind to her. For me, the most upsetting bit of this chapter is when Cersei is helping an unknowing Sansa get ready for her wedding, and Sansa thinks Cersei is just being kind, and is so grateful it is pitiful, and it breaks my heart every time I read it. There is also Sansa's part in Joffrey's death. This is very important. She was complicit in the death of her first crush, who turned into her tormentor, and even though her part in his death was very small, she is horrified by it, though she recognizes that he deserved it. Would not this horrifying, significant event not have some psychological effect on her, like all the killing does on Arya? Sansa was also involved in the death of her aunt Lysa, and though she doesn't feel sorry for Lysa, knowing what Lysa was prepared to do to her, she still seems horrified by the events. She also seems very scared by what was done to Marillion. She acknowledges that he is not a nice person, but feels the blinding was a bit extreme. Not to mention the fact that Sansa had to lie to the Lords of the Vale about what really occurred to her aunt. This must have had a profound psychological effect on her in some way, shape, or form, as her brain is still developing. The man who rescued her just murdered one of her closest blood relatives in front of her. This must be horrifying for anybody. Because of what Sansa has experienced, I think, like her sister Arya, she is cut off from her emotions. Sansa Stark has made a lot of bad decisions, but I believe she has learnt from them, and she definitely knows what suffering is. I truly believe her core is good, and in Winds of Winter she will be a great force for good in the Vale and the North, as long as she can get herself away from Littlefinger. Hello and welcome to Jessie Bear Book Club. Today we are talking about one of my favourite A Song of Ice and Fire characters, Sansa Stark. During my 6th read-through of the books, some really interesting stuff in Sansa's chapters started to stand out to me, and that was that there was a lot of foreshadowing about falling or jumping from a great height to commit suicide, and I thought this topic deserved a deeper dive and a little bit more attention, so here we go. Of course, the most obvious piece of foreshadowing here is Sansa with Lysa and the moon door, but I want to look at some of the other factors. The foreshadowing first became apparent to me in Sansa's last chapter in A Game of Thrones. It is full of references to falling or being pushed that are then mirrored when Sansa is in the area with Lysa, who's threatening to push her through the moon door. Sansa really wants to push Joffrey off the parapet after he makes her look at her father's head on a spike. She seriously considers grabbing him and jumping, even if it is only for a few seconds. There is also Sansa's obsession with Sir Ilyn Payne to consider. It could be put down to the fact that he is the man who executed her father, or it could have a more sinister meaning, where Sansa is longing for the hell she is living to be over. In A Clash of Kings, before Sansa gets her first period, she nearly falls off a tower in the Red Keep, but the Hound saves her. There was so much foreshadowing in this chapter for the moon door scene. I cannot believe George R.R. Martin would only use this imagery once. I think he is planning to use it again at some other point, maybe at the end of Sansa's story. It is also very interesting that at the end of the Hound and Sansa's conversation, the Hound says, "Fly away, little bird, I am sick of you peeping at me." Does he mean fly away or fall away? If you are jumping, doesn't it amount to the same thing in the end? Sweet Robin certainly thinks so, and he is Sansa's first cousin. Sansa is also known as Alayne Stone, meaning she has metaphorically killed off Sansa Stark. I also think it is very funny that her new name is Alayne Stone because Alayne is a girl's name of Arabic origin which means rock princess. And doesn't the name Alayne sound a lot like Alyssa, which brings to mind Alyssa's tears? And the meaning of the name Alyssa is God is a promise. And doesn't God promise eternal peace for us all? Alyssa's life and Sansa's life mirror each other in grief. According to legend, Alyssa saw her husband, her brother, and her children killed in front of her, but she never shed a tear, and as a consequence, after her own death, the gods determined that she would not know rest until her tears reached the Vale of Erin below her, where all those she had loved were buried, and after Ned's execution, Sansa tries very hard never to cry in public. I like to think that the waterfall of Alyssa's tears falls from the spot wherefrom Alyssa threw herself in her silent sorrow. But maybe I'm just an old romantic. There is also the small fact that the Tullys seem to be touched by madness due to their Went blood. The Went women in particular seem to be batshit crazy, and isn't it kind of funny that the sigil of House Went is a giant bat? Could George R.R. Martin be playing some sort of weird joke with his out-of-use sigil? Minissa Went was the mother of Catelyn, Lysa, and Edmure Tully, and we know virtually nothing about her. Was she spontaneous and reckless like Catelyn, seizing Tyrion and letting the Kingslayer loose? Was she obsessive and needy like Lysa? Or power-hungry, insecure, and jealous like Edmure? I honestly would really like to know. None of the Tullys lack intelligence. They simply lack impulse control, and you can see this in their children as well. Robb Stark is quick to violence. He threatens Yoren when Yoren tells him Benjen Stark is dead, and he welcomes Tyrion with naked steel in his lap. He also takes Lord Karstark's head. Are these actions youth or a touch of something else? Arya, Rickon, and Sweet Robin are all quick to violence. And Sansa and Bran don't think things the whole way through before acting on their desires. As always, this theory could be complete tinfoil, and we all have to wait for Winds of Winter to come out, but I would not be surprised if after a crushing defeat, or her platonic husband Tyrion is executed, Sansa decides enough is enough and does something drastic. I would really hate to see Sansa's story end like this, but I would not be surprised if it did. Not all princesses get their happy endings, especially in A Song of Ice and Fire. Be sure to check out my other A Song of Ice and Fire videos on this channel. I have an entire playlist of my theories. I also have some really good A Song of Ice and Fire and wildcard comparison videos for you to check out. Until next time, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Bye!